We have been reporting for almost 2 years now on the fact that the top priority of Western centers of power is to implement a rigorous and official and a legally endorsed regime of censorship that primarily controls the principal means that we use to communicate with one another, to disseminate information and ideas, to receive our news, which is the internet, and particularly the small handful of large platforms that have commandeered the power over the flow of information. And there's been all kinds of reporting, of course, on all the different ways that Western governments are attempting to influence and coerce censorship, to demand that views that they regard as threatening be banned. Every new crisis, including the election of Trump and Brexit and Russiagate and the 2020 election and January 6th and COVID and the war in Ukraine and now the war in Israel, is seized upon, every single one of them seized upon, as justification for more and more censorship. That is how this censorship regime has been fortified. And one of the things that has happened without much media attention, we cover it every time it happens when we can, is that governments around the world, around the democratic world, are now adopting laws that empower them explicitly to wield this censorship power. It had been the case that they were doing it informally. The Twitter files, of course, were about how the CIA, the FBI, Homeland Security would pick up the phone and call Facebook and Google and Twitter and say, hey, what about this tweet? Why are you eyeing this one up? We want this one banned. There's a disinformation tweet about COVID. Here's one about Ukraine. We want these gone. And a federal court recently ruled that the Biden administration's fixation on doing this violates the First Amendment. In fact, one of the gravest attacks on free speech, said the court ruling, in decades, if not in the history of the judiciary. But governments are really not content any longer to use that kind of informal threat or that kind of shaming or the leverage they have over these companies because they regulate them, because they dole out benefits. Instead, they're now adopting legal frameworks that lay out the powers that they have and provide for punishments, serious punishments, in the event that major social media platforms do not comply with their censorship demands. It is now a crime or illegal not to censor in the way that Western governments want. I can't overstate how repressive that is. We used to talk all the time about how China would impose all sorts of restrictions on the flow of political speech in China. That's exactly what Western governments are doing, and they're doing it by law. We covered the enactment and the approval of the Online Safety Act in the UK. Look at how Orwellian that is, the Online Safety Act, which is trying to make the internet safer for you by keeping away from you unsafe or dangerous ideas. And we have been reporting on the law that is pending in Brazil, which would be one of the most repressive of all, but it was at the last minute. Its enactment was prevented because Google and Facebook went to the mat to argue against it, to the point that the Brazilian Supreme Court banned them from doing that further, ordered the executive of those companies to appear at the federal police for interrogation over the activism in which they were engaged to stop the law. But one of the most repressive laws, and we've talked about the law in Canada as well recently, which is the C11 law, that isn't quite as extreme as the UK law. And the most extreme of all is actually the one that has now been adopted by the EU, which is the Digital Services Act, an incredibly benign sounding law that in fact is incredibly repressive. And they have been building up, they have been laying the foundation for months. We've been reporting on every step of the way to essentially create a perception that the failure on the part of social media companies to censor in accordance with their demands is dangerous. It's causing the flow of disinformation and hate speech. It's fortifying Russian propaganda. And as I said, the war in Israel and Gaza is not even 3 days old. And already the EU official who oversees this new censorship law, who advocated for it, who's been a longtime censorship advocate. He's a French official who works right under the German president of the EU. He has been working overtime to create the perception publicly that Twitter and Google and Facebook's failure to censor is a serious public threat that the EU now has to do something about. And one of the tactics that censors always use when it comes time to censor is they always deliberately choose, in the first instance, someone who is so widely disliked that most of the public won't mind when those people are silenced. They think, oh, well, I don't really care if this person with this extreme view has been silenced. That person is dangerous. The problem is, the reason they choose someone deeply unpopular is because they know the public will acquiesce. And now the precedent has been set. And then once they start using it on less disliked people or people who have a greater proximity to, say, the mainstream, by then it's too late. You've given them that power. Remember, the very first people who were depersoned by big tech got together and chose to eliminate them from big tech platforms all at once. It was in 2018 during the Trump years, of course, and it was Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones, two of the people most widely hated, certainly by mainstream venues. And everybody said, well, I don't really care that Alex Jones can't be heard or Milo Yiannopoulos can't be heard. They spread hatred, they spread lies. And obviously it was very predictable. And one of the very few people who stood up and objected at the time was Peter Thiel, who sat on the board of Facebook, who said, this is an extremely dangerous precedent. Within a very short period of time, they were using it against more and more and more people, including people who weren't as disliked as those two. But by then, the power had been given to them because people didn't object. That's always what they do. And so one of the things the EU is doing, even though they're after Facebook and Google equally, is they're focused primarily on Twitter, on what is now X, because of how hated Elon Musk has become in neoliberal culture, given his commitment to free speech and his refusal to censor on command. And they know that going after Facebook or Google this way will be more difficult, in part because they're just much bigger and more powerful companies. Twitter is a small fraction of the size of Facebook and Google, but also because Elon Musk has become such a hated figure. This is the person who did more than anybody to bring electric cars to the market at a time that liberals are saying that there's no greater priority than reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. You would think he would be a hero, and yet he's hated because he bought X by waving the free speech banner and promising to defy censorship orders. He's been far from perfect in that. We've covered and criticized him when he has violated his own principles, but he has allowed a lot of people who were previously censored to be heard, and they're enraged by it. They being media elites and political elites, and they know that if they focus on Elon Musk with the use of this new law, there will be enough people happy about it simply because they hate Elon Musk and believe that he's allowing too much free speech, that very few people will object, and then they'll have this power to go and use it against Facebook and Google and everyone else that they want to use it for. And today what they did was they know that emotions are extremely high about the war in Israel. In the West, it is essentially a unified consensus in the mainstream that it is the duty of the West to support Israel. The monuments in Germany and in France and in the UK and in the US have all been lit in solidarity with Israel and support for Israel. The EU, the UK, the US have all pledged across political parties to do everything possible to support Israel. They know that this is the issue that provokes the most emotions right now. And so they wrote a letter today to Twitter, to X, threatening Elon Musk that you are going to pay a huge price if you don't censor more. And they cited an allegation that he's allowing disinformation right now, specifically about Israel, knowing that that would be designed to get people on their pro-censorship side. Here is the news article from Reuters about the article, and what we really want to go through and show you is the letter sent by this leading EU official, which we will, because I don't think you will believe just how heavy-handed and authoritarian and dictatorial it is in its tone, in its sentiment. Here, though, first is Reuters. You see the headline, EU says disinformation spreading on X after Hamas attack, urges Musk to tackle it. Quote, the EU industry chief told Elon Musk that disinformation was spreading on his X messaging platform since Palestinian Islamist group Hamas's surprise attack on Israel, urging him to take countermeasures in line with new EU content rules. Now, let me just stop here and say that obviously nobody likes disinformation in principle. The problem is who has the power to determine what's true and what's false. And I honestly can't fathom the level of drooling authoritarianism necessary to trust or want to empower government officials like Thierry Breton, the French EU official, with the power to determine what is true and what is false, to the point where they have the power to ban anything they decide is disinformation. But that is what this law is. It says it right there. It says, urging him to take countermeasures in line with new EU online content rules, which means that the people who decide what is disinformation and what can and can't be heard are people like Thierry Breton and EU officials. The article goes on, quote, Breton did not give details on, Brenton did not give details on the disinformation he cited. X did not immediately respond to a Reuters comment for request. The online content rules known as the Digital Services Act require X and other online platforms to remove illegal content and to take measures to tackle the risk to public safety and discourse. So this is the key part, is that this law, it purports to require all social media platforms to remove what they regard as illegal content, which includes hate speech and disinformation, and to take measures to tackle the risk to public security and civic discourse, all as determined by the agenda of these EU officials. This is a pure censorship regime. There's no other way to describe it. No drama is needed, no hyperbole. This is a legally enacted, EU-wide censorship regime that now entails massive punishments for any large social media platform that refuses to censor in accordance with the dictates and opinions and agenda of EU officials. And if anyone thinks I'm overstating the case or being melodramatic about it, let us look at the letter sent today by this EU official to Elon Musk. Because, as I said, it's not just the content, but the tone that makes so manifest what's really going on here. Quote, Dear Mr. Musk, you see it there, it's on official EU European Commission stationery. It's from Thierry Breton, a member of the EU Commission. He, of course, is in Brussels. These are bureaucrats, the kind of Brussels-based bureaucrats that the people of the United Kingdom decided they did not want to be ruled by when they enacted Brexit. Because this is the sort of people they are. Quote, following the terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas against Israel. So do you see already what they're doing? They're exploiting these emotions. They're saying, given the outrageous, dangerous terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas against Israel, knowing that most people are horrified by what they saw, as we covered last night, quote, we have indications that your platform is being used to disseminate illegal content and disinformation in the EU. Let me remind you that the Digital Services Act sets very precise obligations regarding content moderation. And as we all know, content moderation is just a liberal euphemism for censorship. But he's saying there that there are now very precise obligations regarding content moderation under this new law. And now he's about to lay out what those requirements are. First, you need to be very transparent and clear on what content is permitted under your terms and consistently and diligently enforce your own policies. Why does the government have the power to require social media platforms to censor in a certain way? He goes on, this is particularly relevant when it comes to violent and terrorist content that appears to circulate on your platform. Your latest changes in public interest policies that occurred overnight left many European users uncertain. Second, when you receive notices of illegal content in the EU, you must be timely, diligent, and objective in taking action and removing the relevant content when warranted. We have, from qualified sources, reports about potentially illegal content circulating on your service despite flags from relevant authorities. Third, you need to have in place proportionate and effective mitigation measures to tackle the risk to public security and civic discourse stemming from disinformation. Public media and civil society organizations widely report instances of fake and manipulated images and facts circulating on your platform in the EU, such as repurposed old images of unrelated armed conflicts or military footage that actually originated from video games. This appears to be manifestly false or misleading information. I therefore invite you to urgently ensure that your systems are effective and report on the crisis measures taken to my team. Do you see how dictatorial these people are, how despotic and authoritarian they are? You are to censor in accordance with our demands, and then you are to report to me on the censorship steps you have taken. Given the urgency, I also expect you to be in contact with the relevant law enforcement authorities and Europol and ensure that you respond promptly to their requests. So we have this whole controversy in the United States because the CIA, Homeland Security, the FBI were pressuring Twitter, Facebook, Google to remove information. The court found that it is unconstitutional, but there in the EU they're saying, we have law enforcement authorities that are going to be contacting you demanding that you take down certain content. And when they do, you had better ensure that you are in contact with the relevant law enforcement authorities in Europol and ensure that you respond promptly to their requests. That is not just a suggestion, that is the requirement of the law now. That social media companies have to obey the censorship orders of European law enforcement agencies, EU agencies, security state agencies, the DOJ, the FBI equivalent, the CIA equivalent, Homeland Security. Quote, moreover, in case you thought the orders were done, moreover, there are more, on a number of other issues of Digital Security Act compliance that deserve immediate attention, my team will follow up shortly with a specific request. I urge you to ensure a prompt and accurate and complete response to this request within the next 24 hours. We will include your answer in our assessment file on your compliance with the DSA. I remind you that following the opening of a potential investigation and a finding of non-compliance, penalties can be imposed. Yours sincerely, Thierry Breton. Are you comfortable with that? I cannot fathom how anyone could be. I genuinely can't. It's one of those issues where, as somebody who tries very hard to see things from other people's perspectives, I actually work a lot on that with my kids, on the importance of not only looking at the world through your own perspective, but trying to understand other people's perspectives if they have a view or a conclusion different than your own. Instead of just condemning it or denouncing it or rejecting it, you have to first try and understand where that's coming from, what the basis is. It's just empathy, the ability to understand the perspective of other people. This is an issue in which, try though I might, I cannot understand how people would think it's a good idea, how they would want and trust government officials to have this power. Except, of course, and you have to be cynical, I guess, to assume this, it's because they believe that these government officials have a perfectly aligned ideology with their own, and that therefore the censorship will only be aimed at their political enemies. I still wouldn't want that if I believe that to be the case. In part because I just think it's wrong intrinsically and dangerous intrinsically, but also because I would never be secure that at some point those leaders will change and then the views about what is disinformation and hate speech will morph and start to be directed at my own cause or my own views. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.